Hey everyone, now that the Expedition trailer is dropped, I'm going to be talking about what I feel are 15 nerfs likely to come in Expedition League. The list won't be in any particular order, but I'll be providing commentary on how likely I think each entry is to be nerfed, as well as why it might see a nerf in the first place. The list won't be including any support gems, as we've already been told most of the strongest ones are being toned down. So first up on the list is mana stacking, and by pure coincidence, it happens to be the thing that I think is most likely going to get nerfed out of this entire list. Mana stacking has been in a very unhealthy place for quite a while now. For a very minimal budget, you can get insane levels of survivability and enough damage to still do encounters such as the Feared without any problem, and that's a problem. So basically, a lot of the abusive elements of mana stacking come from Indigon, Omeyakan, and the Agnostic. That doesn't mean the problem is entirely limited to those three items, but I think those three things are most likely getting nerfed. Indigon and Agnostic alone provide just enough regen for a character to permanently maintain Righteous Fire, and then still have enough excess regen to tank most degens in the game, which is just a problem. And then the fact that that same character can combine both of those things and scale their damage to insane levels via Indigon is truly a problem. Indigon and Agnostic are going to need to see nerfs, but Omeyakan is still really overpowered in my opinion. It's providing 20% attack and spell dodge, so no other boots in the game can come to this level of survivability, and then that's on top of providing perma onslaught, which it's just doing for no reason, to be honest. There's a lot of room to shave power out of Omeyakan, as well as the other two things, so I think those are most likely getting nerfed for sure. Blade Blast is next up on our list, and another thing that I think is very likely to get nerfed. Blade Blast received a nerf going into this league, however the nerf to Blade Vortex meant that Blade Blast still ended up being the strongest league starter in the game. It's spawned many different variants of the build, everything from a Battle Mage Inquisitor to Archmage with mana stacking. It can be played in a range of different ascendancies, everything from, I've seen Elementalist, Hierophant, Inquisitor, and Raider now, and it's just very dominant as a league starting skill. It can scale its damage to insane levels and kill most of the endgame bosses in the without even investing any money at all into the build. It's literally just a tabular and cold iron points, and then it can do pretty much any boss in the game, save for encounters such as the Feared and the Hidden. And even then, you only need to invest a little bit of money into the character to be able to do those things. Basically, the problem with it is that its damage scaling just gets to insane levels once you start to combine it with Blade Fall. Blade Fall allows you to just trigger multiple instances of Blade Blast simultaneously, and it combines to just reach base damage that is unparalleled by anything else in the entire game. This skill could see probably a 40% nerf and still be a very viable and strong skill as a league starter. So I think this is almost definitely getting hit, and it's going to be hit much harder considering that the previous nerf did absolutely nothing to it. Hateforge is a very controversial recent addition to the game, and it's enabled a few new build options, although predominantly the Val Lightning Strike build is the main build to be enabled as a result of Hateforge. The reason I do think it's going to be nerfed, however, is because it is utilizing an unintended interaction of Rage and Val souls, as well as also the fact that it's allowing for the permanent use of Val skills, which is something that GGG have been very clear about in the past about not wanting to be possible, and they have nerfed pretty much every other way of obtaining permanent Val skill usage in the game that's existed previously. So I think Hateforge is likely going to see a nerf in this regard as well. It's unclear exactly whether Hateforge is going to be added into the game in 3.15 or whether it's going to be added back in at a later date. However, I do think that by the time it is next made available to us, it's likely going to be in a heavily nerfed state. It's probably not going to enable the Val Lightning Strike build anymore, and you're going to simply see it as a chase item that buffs builds that use Val skills, but not in the sort of way that it's currently being used. The self-chill mechanic was definitely intended by GGG, however, I don't think they intended for us to be able to scale it to 30% like we're doing on the current patch. Now, There is some cost associated with doing this. We have to give up all our class sigils to accomplish this. However, we can pretty much do this with most builds in the game, and most of those builds are benefiting both from the increased movement speed and the increased DPS. The build you're seeing at the moment in Stormbrand doesn't so much benefit at all from having increased action speed, but because we're scaling up shock effect, it is allowing us to gain vastly improved clay speed from a character that was otherwise moving pretty slow. I don't see this lasting another patch. This ticks all the boxes for a nerf, basically. It's an unintended mechanic. It's allowing characters to cheat out extra movement speed, which GGG don't like at all. I just can't see this lasting any longer than it already has. So this is definitely going to be high up on my list of things that I expect to get nerfed. I'm grateful that GGG's allowed us to have a bit of fun with it on the current patch, but there's pretty much no way this lasts into next patch, in my opinion. Whilst Elemental Hit has quickly become one of my favorite skills in the game, that is in no small part due to how overpowered it is. As you can see by the PoE and Ninja list here, it's reaching numbers that most other skills can't even dream of coming close to. And I think what's crazier than the things you're seeing on the screen at the moment is the fact that you can still reach about 6 million single target DPS against Cirrus with under 10 exalts worth of investment. Characters just shouldn't be able to get that strong that quickly and that easily, and especially bow characters shouldn't be able to. Bow characters still have clearing skills, which with a single click of the button can pretty much delete every enemy on the entire screen. It's just unfair to have the whole package pretty much, and on a budget, you know. Elemental Hit is almost definitely getting nerfed, and what's made it worse is the fact that it's played typically as a Raider. Raider is an Ascendancy, which is also going to make an appearance on this list as something I expect to get nerfed, but even if Raider is nerfed separately, I still think they're going to tone down the base damage of Elemental Hit at the very least. The Enduring Composure notable that comes from small armor cost sigils is pretty bonkers. It ends up providing you with 70% physical damage reduction and 25% elemental damage reduction for 2.5 seconds every time you take damage after the first instance when you combine it with a cast when damage taken or mortal call, and that's just absolutely insane. It shouldn't exist. It really should have been nerfed a few patches ago, and what makes it worse is that you don't have to pay a large amount of money to access this combination of things, and all you're giving up on the tree is 3 passive points. Nothing else comes close to providing this much mitigation, but the things that do provide a lot of mitigation from other sources in the game, they require much larger investments in terms of what you're giving up on your gear or the amount of money you have to pay to obtain that sort of mechanic. So this is just several magnitudes beyond what should get nerfed, and I'm really surprised this has even remained in the game in its current state as long as it has. So channeling clusters haven't really been overpowered in any sense of the word, typically, but with the change to Chainbreaker making skills cost rage, Unwavering Focus starts to become rather problematic. By stacking lots of these, typically using voices, you can reduce the cost of Winter Orb or Cyclone to 0, and that includes the rage costs. By making these skills cost no rage, when combined with the Chainbreaker, you basically just have a ton of rage generation with no cost whatsoever. That allows you to then abuse Berserk for pretty much the entire map in much the same way we were doing last patch, but even worse, and I can't see this being allowed to continue on. Now this has been combined with the other notable Rapid Infusion. Rapid Infusion provides a lot of increased movement speed, which I think it's worse with Cyclone than it is with Winter Orb, because when you're already running 6 or 7 of these, this is now 30 to 35% extra movement speed, and then since you already pretty much have permanent infusion with Cyclone, you're getting a lot of increased damage here. I think the easiest way to fix these is just to change Unwavering Focus to say 15% reduced mana cost of channeling skills. This way it can't really interact with Chainbreaker, which is what GGG intended and what would make this notable fair. The Raider Ascendancy has been in a really good spot for a lot longer than what people are willing to give it credit for. However, the recent buffs it received, which were admittedly rather minor, basically allowed it to receive more attention from other players, and with a number of top players such as Grimro finally giving it a go and then realizing that it's strong, it's now seen a lot of people jump on board and start using it. And in particular, a lot of the reason people are using it is because it's pretty much the fastest ascendancy. So I'd say the 4 fastest ascendancies in the game are Assassin, Raider, Deadeye, and Berserker, mainly because they have access to enhanced version of movement speed increasing mechanics, namely Elusive, Tailwind, Onslaught, and Rage. And then on top of that, they are basically getting the enhanced versions of these things. But the thing that sets Raider apart is that it also gains movement speed scaling off of frenzy charges, in this case 4% per frenzy charge. It's very easy to get to around 10 frenzy charges on a Raider, though sometimes he's sitting at 8 or 9, but this is still between 30 to 40% extra movement speed on top of what all those other ascendancies are getting, and the increased effect of Onslaught being buffed as much as it is putting Raider to really insane levels. So this branch of the tree is pretty much giving you 50% movement speed, and then this is giving you 40% movement speed to combine for 90% movement speed out of an ascendancy. On top of that, Berserker can't really pave or to this part of the tree, nor can it use Disciple of the Slaughter. And whilst Assassin can pave all the way here, it doesn't really want to. It gives up a lot of points getting here and doesn't really get very many useful things along the way. Deadeye and Raider are the only ascendancies that can really access Disciple of the Slaughter, and I think Raider is best positioned to use it. But taking Disciple of the Slaughter allows you to then get the movement speed per frenzy charge node along the way, which is giving you another 2%, and that equates to about 20%. So Raider is just moving way too fast, and on top of moving way too fast, it has a lot of damage packed into it, right? You're getting about 50% attack speed here, you're getting a ton of increased attack damage, and even more attack speed off of this, so that's like another 40% attack speed here, and 100% increased attack damage, and that's if you take these 2 nodes. Avatar of the Veil and Quartz Infusion are really good defensive mechanics as well to be taking, so this Ascendancy is just overloaded with good options. And it pretty much doesn't matter whether you're a caster, a melee character, or a bow character. You have 4 Ascendancy notables at least that are highly useful to you and are going to just make you move really fast, do tons of damage, and mitigate a ton of damage in return. I think the easiest way to tell that Raider has moved to the position of being overpowered is the fact that it's the second most used Ascendancy in the Gauntlet race. Raider uses Dodge. Dodge is very inconsistent defensive mechanic, and yet even so it's the second most played ascendancy, so I think that just goes to show how crazy Raider is at the moment. So, and that's why I would expect Raider to get nerfed. Elementalist making the list is probably a surprise to absolutely nobody, but we'll spend a bit of time talking about why it's on the list. Mastermind Discord makes Elementalists have some of the best damage penetration in the game. There's no point allowing Inquisitors to ignore enemy elemental penetration when an Elementalist with minimal investment can reduce enemy resist below 0, making it automatically stronger than something Inquisitor has to invest a 100% total crit into to benefit from fully. And then on top of that, the node has some extra mana regen slapped in for no reason. The minor nodes on here come with elemental resistance in some cases, which they just shouldn't. Shaper of Flames is making Ignite-based builds very overpowered, as it's allowing you to scale additional lightning and cold damage, which then gets converted to fire for free and amplified by 25%. On top of that, the Golem notables are also in a really insane place. So getting 4 max Golems pretty much just involves taking these 2 nodes here and then investing 3 points over here. And what this does is it gets you very close to having 20% physical damage reduction via Chaos Golem, which is close to the Fortify damage reduction that a champion's getting. It's giving you between level 50 and 60 Vitality via your Stone Golem. You're getting a ton of increased crit chance, cast speed, and over 200% increased damage from your Flame Golem, depending on which ones you pick, which there's just no reason for a build to be this strong. And on top of that, the Elemental mitigation, by far the best out of every Ascendancy in the whole game. Bastion of Elements is giving you about 3,000 extra EHP for elemental damage, and it exists at the highest level of automation. That is, you don't have to ever press this skill, it just exists automatically. When you don't take damage for a little while, it refreshes. When you fully deplete it, it refreshes itself. There's no reason why it should exist like this. It's just too strong, and so is Elementalist. I think Elementalist being in this position makes it very hard to build Inquisitors that are stronger than their Elementalist counterparts for most skills in the game. For sure, Inquisitor still has the niche of being able to scale a health and energy shield at the same time via its dual regen and I think it still has a very useful niche with Battle Mage, but for most conventional ways of scaling spells, you pretty much only care about scaling them with an Elementalist or an Assassin, and the Assassin at least has the weakness of being rather squishy. Elementalist doesn't really have any weaknesses. You can get really nice damage, really nice survivability, and you don't really have to invest much to get it. Fortify is a very powerful defensive mechanic that is also extremely accessible, being easily accessed by any melee character in the game, as well as still being obtainable by spell and bow users. And what makes it further problematic is the fact that you can stack the effect of Fortify up to very high levels in order to mitigate ridiculous amounts of damage. I think one of the main reasons why Fortify is on the chopping block and very likely going to see a potential nerf is due to the fact that various other defensive mechanics such as Divine Flesh and Corrupted Soul have seen nerfs, and those defensive mechanics are both weaker and also less accessible than Fortify. So it seems pretty likely that Fortify is finally going to see its nerf, and the way I do envision a nerf would be to reduce the base amount of Fortify to say 15%, and then slightly buff some of the increased effect of Fortify nodes, so that whilst it can't be stacked to the same levels that it previously could, it's still going to be both weaker at a baseline and worth investing into via your gear. Bottled Faith is the strongest defensive flask in the game by an absolute mile. There's no reason why this should continue existing in the state it does, as it just crowds out all the other options, and on top of that, it's very useful in the sense that you can buy one and then just move it between pretty much all your characters, and in that way it's kind of like a mini headhunter, in that once you acquire one, all the characters you play pretty much are permanently stronger as a result of having access to Bottled Faith. Granted, there are some builds, namely dot builds, that may not necessarily want to use this, but it's just got a lot going for it. The creation of Consecrated Ground is giving you 6% life regen per second, and it's causing your damage to have higher crit chance against enemies. Because of the tripled radius of the Consecrated Ground, it's much more likely that enemies are going to be on said Consecrated Ground, particularly bosses. But then on top of this, it's giving you base crit chance, which scales really well with the 100% increased crit chance from enemies being on Consecrated Ground. And then on top of that, enemies are taking 10% increased damage, which is basically a 10% more multiplier on your damage. And on top of this, the base effect of the flask is 40% increased damage. Why does it exist like this? I have absolutely no idea. And on top of all this, it lasts 6 seconds and you basically get 3 uses out of it, which means you can chain it back to back for a total of 18 seconds of benefit. This flask is truly insane, and it deserves a nerf yesterday. Now, the other must-have flask that I also think really deserves a nerf, and is probably going to receive one soon enough, is the Cinder Swallow Urn. The Cinder Swallow Urn basically grants the strongest recovery of any flask in the game. It's pretty much the only way to recover large amounts of energy shield via a flask, but on top of that, you're getting life and mana recovery. This is very useful for hybrid characters which are scaling both their life and mana, or their life and an energy shield, or in some rare cases all three, as you're getting all sources of EHP back at the same time on kill. And then it has some extra effects that basically make the enemies take 10% increased damage. Consuming enemies upon death is granting you extra charges, so 2 charges per kill, which is kind of dumb and really overpowered, as it's allowing you to refill this flask very fast. And then on top of all this, you're getting a Veiled mod, which I'll just show you here. You can get any of these mods. So basically, increased movement speed and a chance to avoid being stunned, increased crit chance, damage taken is recouped as life, regenerate 3% of life per second during flask effect, and then reduce mana cost of skills. And on top of all that, you're still gaining Onslaught, which is the base effect of the flask. I don't know that I'd say this flask is as overpowered as Bottled Faith, but it still occupies that position of being a must-have flask for pretty much most builds. And, you know, if your character doesn't have one of these, it's definitely not operating at full strength. It's giving you a lot of survivability against the most dangerous encounters and League mechanics, namely things like Delirium, Legion, Ultimatum, Ritual. This flask is just a must-have for these kinds of League mechanics, and You're gimping your character if you don't have it, and which is exactly why I think it needs to be nerfed, because when you compare flasks like Cinder Swallow against things like Wise Oak or Atziri's Promise, it's just very hard to make the case to, make room for those other flasks when stuff like this exists. This is just completely overloaded, and you could pull a bunch of mods off this flask and it would still see use on a whole variety of builds, which to me is quite a problem. A few patches ago, Slimes and Warcries were reworked, and ever since they've been producing very dominant characters that are able to clear most of the endgame on a very minimal investment. And whilst it's not very problematic from a softcore point of view, when it comes to hardcore and solo self-found environments, these builds are crowding out a lot of other skills, and it's really hurting build diversity overall. I think Earthquake and Earthshatter are the biggest two offenders, which is why I would personally prefer to only see those two skill gems nerfed. I could see GGG being very heavy-handed and either nerfing slam modifiers or nerfing a Warcry that affects slams, which means there could be a lot of collateral damage, and I truly do think that would be a bit of a shame, since most slams don't seem to be that much of a problem from a balance perspective. However, I am pretty confident that 3.15 is the time in which these skills and these builds are going to get reined in, especially due to the fact that whilst many people have been asking or speculating that these nerfs are coming, they have stated that 3.15 is the time in which they want to sort of rein all the overpowered builds in. So this entry isn't something I expect to get nerfed, but it's something that probably should get nerfed, and that's the Prismatic Heart notable. Now, I know there are a lot of cluster-dual notables that are particularly strong, but part of why Prismatic Heart is problematic is because it provides some of the best damage for the elemental damage large clusters, but that's on top of providing 30% elemental resist, and being pretty easy to roll. It's not one of those mods that's really rare and has a low weighting, it's actually just got, I think, the highest weighting on pretty much all the cluster jewels that it appears on, and it rolls in a bunch of combinations that are rather convenient. You can get a lot of these 3-mod clusters that have Prismatic Heart located in a very favorable position without investing too much currency into clusters. So I'd expect to probably see it get a weighting nerf, but you could also probably lower the auras that it's giving to 5, and it would still be a very good node. So not much else to say there, it's just very overtuned for what a cluster node should give, and whilst I don't expect a nerf, it's something that is semi-likely, especially if it's on GGG's radar. Last but certainly not least on this list is Nemesis farming, something that I personally hope dies as fast as possible. This isn't just unhealthy for the game, but it's also unhealthy for the player base given the sheer amount of clicking required in a single map, and whilst you spend about 5 minutes clearing the map, you end up spending 15 to 20 minutes looting the map. I don't think that creates a particularly fun experience for anyone engaging in this sort of content, and I think it has a lot of the same problems that Delirium maps had, and a lot of the same problems that Fractured Blueprints had before that. So I highly expect to see this nerfed or changed significantly, and regardless of whether the likelihood is high or not, I personally just hope to see it nerfed. I don't like this content, I felt kind of baited to interact with it given how profitable it is, but I don't think any amount of profit is worth putting your hands through this and also putting your sanity through this. This just isn't fun, and there needs to be some better way for this type of map to exist without requiring this much individual loot to drop. I think a much easier way would be to sort of allow players to juice their maps, but then drop lesser amounts of more valuable loot, or simply for GGG just to add AoE loot into the game, although I know that's something that they're personally not very keen on doing, so I don't think that's really a viable solution in this instance. In the meantime, just nerf the hell out of it. I don't want to see it. I don't want to have anything to do with it. I don't want it to exist in the game, because I'll feel obliged to do it as long as it's worth doing, and it's just not good for the game. Nothing much else to say there, other than the fact that pretty much everyone who's done it ends up hating it sooner or later, and it comes as absolutely no surprise, because the money is there, but so is the risk entry tree, and that's just not worth it. So there you have my top 15 things that I think are going to get nerfed next patch. Let me know in the comments whether you think I missed anything, or whether there are any entries that you particularly disagree with. I'd be interested in hearing how close I am to some of your lists, but I'm pretty certain that most of you probably agree with the vast majority of the things on this list, at least the things that were on your radar as well. Anyway, I will see you guys in the next one. Have a good one for now.